we're actually going to continue with John and my other panelists to look forward at both technologies of the future and also the mechanisms that will enable them to have an impact on our world. So what are the capital structures that we currently have, and what different kinds of capital structures would help us move forward? Talking about the money is what we do. What does this mean on the home level, and what can people do right now to provide the tech of the future? So joining me to answer all of these questions is John Bucknell, the founder and CEO of Virtus Solaris, the first low-cost space solar power system able to address the entire $8 trillion energy market. Sarah Merrick, the founder and CEO of Ripple Energy, who makes clean energy ownership affordable and accessible for everyone. And Emma Fletcher, who is the low-carbon housing director at Octopus Energy. Her career has centered on leading high-impact, high-innovation projects in real estate with a particular focus on housing, energy performance, and green energy production. Welcome, all of you. Hello. Hello. Sorry for that really rambling introduction. I'd like to start off because, John, obviously, you're on stage quite recently. We had a question that Pablo said that you could answer, and I think it tails quite nicely with a question that I have, which is basically about the problem of space debris. I was talking to another of our speakers earlier this morning, and he said, eloquently, as he is an artist, that we are surrounding ourselves with loads of our own crap to the point where we won't be able to see anything in space soon. If you have the aim of putting solar panels in space, we're not just talking about the noise and how much interference might happen bringing it down, but also space debris. How big of a problem will that be?
It is not a great problem. Certainly, there is a lot of orbital assets that are in low Earth orbit, so something below 2,000 kilometers. I'm at 35,000. It's very quiet up there, fortunately. There's only been one incident of space debris impacting any satellites up in the geostationary at 35,000 kilometers, same as where we are, in the last 40 years. So you can worry about the low Earth orbit part, and frankly, the solar cycle most recently has inflated the atmosphere a bit and dragged a lot of these low orbit satellites down, and the debris comes with it. But you do have to manage the debris, and a lot of the regulators are making sure that you have plans to bring your satellites down at the end. And that's really one of the big key elements as we're putting up these bigger constellations, is having a plan to do something at the end of life. So those are the big ones that you have to worry about. If you're going to operate in that environment, you have to have a robust system. We've designed a system that is hyper modular, millions of identical elements, and they're networked together, and they can lose a large fraction of their operability and still continue to function. So you have to plan for the debris, and you also have to plan both ways, both plan at the end of the life and plan to work with it while you're operating there. But conceivably, if you put it in high orbit, you can be up there hundreds of years with no worries.
There have been challenges on the ground, and I'm interested to understand, because we're talking about capital, and obviously the proof is in the pudding, right? Can you get that energy to people's homes or to the infrastructure or to the companies that you're trying to provide energy to? There are challenges with offshore wind farms and getting that energy to the places it needs to go. Space is further away than an offshore wind farm. So how do you square that circle? I mean, would it not be easier to just do solar panels on Earth?
Yeah, so I think Pablo's touched on this, but the biggest challenge with the intermittent renewables is that the energy is generated when and where you don't want it. It's generated in the south. You guys might know there's a project to run a cable underwater from Morocco to here. Yeah. 3,800 kilometers of copper to get the sunlight to here in the UK. But the interesting about space solar is that the satellites are always above you, and you can see the ground, unlike moving it from out at sea to the ground. So most of the installed capacity, at least that's been going on in the US, are stranded because they can't get the distribution assets arranged, even on public land. So the offshore wind is a bigger challenge like that because of the right-of-way and all the other parts about building distribution. So having a distribution system built in to an energy system is key to that. But the big thing is that you can get it day or night anytime, and that trumps offshore wind. Even though offshore wind blows quite often, you have to build really big systems offshore to make it work. And then you have to get it to land where the sun's always up there. It's only about 100 miles up, and If you can design a system to do it inexpensively, you can serve those markets just as well.
There was a point that one of our audience members made just a few minutes ago about this all sounding very much like science fiction, and it all feeling very remote to your average person who's, living in a flat somewhere or in a house somewhere in the UK. I wonder, from the perspective, and I think Ripple can very much attest to this, how can you get people to engage with the concept of saying, actually, I can buy a share in a solar panel in space, or I can buy a share in a wind farm, and it's far, far away? How does that work, and how can you get people interested in doing that?
I think you really need to show people behind the curtain and sort of let them see what's happening. So we have, when we are building a wind farm, which we're doing at the moment, we share videos of the turbine parts coming on the ship. People could track the ship with their turbine blades and towers. They could track it from Turkey coming to Scotland. They can see the turbines being built. Once it's generating, they can see how much their individual little share is generating in real time, how much it's forecast to generate. So it's all about just kind of bringing it alive for people, because I think, electricity and energy has been a very kind of passive sector, or consumers have been seen to be very passive in the sector. They just sit there and, pay whatever bill lands on their doorstep. Whereas actually, if you just let consumers in and let them be part, a much bigger part of the whole sector, then actually they love it. They want more information. They want to know how much they can get more involved. And I mean, ultimately, you have to enable them to do it, which is exactly what we do. So yeah, you can now own a bit of a wind farm, a bit of a solar park, and that's your source of clean, low-cost power. So yeah, and it has to be really easy, but really engaging as well.
Do you think that normal people could be alternative funding sources for companies like yours, allowing you to set up, whether it's wind farms, solar farms, whatever, where perhaps capital is lacking?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a big shortage of capital in the industry, but what we think is that consumers should be part of the ownership mix. So, so far we've funded about £75 million worth of projects. That's across 2 wind farms and 1 solar park, and we're just planning on doing more and more. So it's not necessarily about competing capital, because there's not a big shortage of capital. It's more about enabling consumers. These are fantastic assets to own. There's a reason why pension funds and infrastructure funds want to own these assets, because they're brilliant things to own. And yeah, it's just enabling consumers to be part of that and let them sit at the table alongside all the other big institutional investors.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense. And Sarah, from your perspective, because obviously you deal with different housing preoccupations, we've got a situation where a lot of people might not be able to, and actually I might want to bring Emma into this as well, a lot of people might not be able to have their own, in their backyard, anything that might generate energy, that they obviously are interested perhaps in being part of the equation. Do you think this kind of initiative, perhaps Emma, you could respond to this, could help to bridge that gap as well and get people, could it be a gateway drug into renewable energy interest?
So I think for us, we very much agree with the Minister this morning. Mm-hmm. This should be clean, green and affordable to everybody. Yeah. And therefore, that's really our raison d'etre, is to make sure everything that we do is there for everybody as well. And so whilst there's models for those who can pay, actually we're looking at things like the fan club, right, which is our wind turbines. So we're trying to effectively find landowners who are willing to put up wind turbines on their land, or even solar farms as well, but then match them directly with the communities around them. Mm-hmm. So there's a direct benefit, because I've spent 25 years in construction and development. The one thing I'd say about space is there's no local authority planners in space. Okay, you try and get anything through the local authority. Mission impossible. So we need to work with communities. That's those who can pay, those who are affordable tenants, all of those people that this could benefit from. And while saving the planet, we've also got to help those that are really battling with the cost of living crisis at the moment.
Yes, it's very difficult, and it does seem like for a lot of people, even if you might have opted for renewable energy as part of your energy provision for home, that your bills will still go up, right? And that's a problem. We're looking at this winter, we're looking at this incredibly cold conference room that's being powered by air conditioning. And I do wonder, reputationally wise, and this is perhaps a question for all three of you, where do you think renewable energy sits when it comes to priorities for capital investment and also people's sentiment towards investing themselves? Have things become easier, as you were saying, Sarah, because people are seeing that they have to act? John, should we start with you?
I'll start. Certainly, I'm a few years away from a commercial product, but we already have customer orders. There's a huge demand, especially in the U.S., where there's the Inflation Reduction Act, which is big incentives to decarbonize, and so there is, to Pablo's point, probably infinite demand if you can provide the product that suits the needs. So it's there, and even for you guys have products already. I'm still a few years out, but yeah, already there's pull. So yeah.
And what we see is broadly like a third of our customers, they've already got the EV, the heat pump, rooftop solar, and they're looking for kind of, the cherry on top, basically, to kind of like, finish it off. But then there's about a third of customers, and buying a bit of a wind farm or a solar park is like the first green purchase that they've made. They're not even interested at that point in buying an EV or getting a heat pump. And so it definitely is that sort of gateway into, clean energy. Because if we can show people that it's really easy, then they think, oh, owning your own wind farm, that's really easy. What about getting an EV? What about getting a heat pump? And so it's kind of just, again, it all comes down to making it really simple and engaging for people. And like once they just see that one thing's easy, then they'll be far more likely, we expect, to then consider heat pumps and consider EVs as well. So it is about kind of just starting people off on that journey. But as I said, lots of customers have already got everything you can possibly imagine, and this is just, the icing on the cake.
It seems like the lead time for a lot of projects is still very long. I was speaking to someone earlier saying, your average wind farm takes, 10 years to build. It's the demand is very much there. The supply is a challenge. Are there any bright ideas that you might have to kind of bridge that gap faster than we currently are doing things?
So we only launch projects once they've got consent. So we kind of launch it, raise the money for it from customers, and then build it. So it's about 18 months from people buying their share to starting getting savings on their bills. We absolutely need to get better grid. We need to obviously improve the ability for people to get planning consents for new wind farms in England. There are loads of things. None of it is rocket science. It's really easy, boring stuff that we need to do to just unlock all this huge potential that there is in the UK.
Yeah.
So I think that a lot of people actually who could and are motivated to do it have already done some stuff themselves. What we're appealing to is the masses of people who can't afford to, or maybe in the instance of some of my mum and her friends, think they're going to have to die before they have to do anything, right? And that is a big problem. So those that can pay probably actually aren't motivated to do anything. Those that are motivated to do anything haven't got the money to pay for it. And actually, your question about what about this next winter, more people will be focused on their bill than they will be about trying to actually save the planet. And that's the reality. And that's why we've got to incentivize people with what we're doing with a monetary incentive as well. We've got to help change behaviours. We've got to look after those that are most vulnerable, which we try very hard to do, and also make sure that actually there's an education piece that goes alongside.
So you're saying that the older generation thinks they're just going to die before?
Yeah, basically. I say, prime example, we've done a district heating scheme in our village, free to join. Why wouldn't you join? We're all on oil. Why wouldn't you join? They just think, I don't need to. And that is a really big thing. So when you're in a room like this full of people who all speak the same language, we're all in the same place, believe me, on the street, the man and the woman on the street have got so many other things going on in their life that this is so low down, and that's what we've got to change.
Yeah.
And they've got to see direct benefits. When a wind turbine goes up, they've got to see 50% coming off their bill when the wind's blowing strong. They need to see that direct link to prove it's making a difference to them personally.
And Octopus has done a bit of that, right? You've been basically giving people money. So what I read was that, Octopus has basically been paying people back, right? That if they get any savings off of their...
So I've got 2 kids, right?
Yeah.
Kids are really difficult to manage. But actually, on the whole, if they do something right, rewarding for good behaviour helps them actually then go and do something better, right?
Yeah.
You write a thank you letter, you say, well done, and then they're polite forevermore, right, in theory. So actually, if we go and help people now, say to them, look, if you change your habits, it helps the bigger picture, we will pay you. it starts to get into the mindset of people that this is the way they should behave, and that's good for everyone.
Yeah, there's another obstacle at the moment. I know obviously the government is very much trying to incentivise people to insulate their homes, to buy heat pumps, to buy smart meters, to buy all kinds of different things. But for a lot of people, even if you can do that, the upfront cost is humongous, and you don't tend to see the returns, as you were saying, Emma. You don't tend to see the returns immediately, and in fact, it might be years until you break even, right? And so, I wonder, from that perspective, is there another barrier on the consumer level where people go, it's not even that I think I might die before the next winter and therefore I don't care about anything, nihilism. It's more about saying, actually, I don't have 30 years where I can afford to pay an upfront cost of 20k to put in a heat pump that I'm still going to have to pay alongside my bills. Is there conversation that needs to happen there where we bridge the gap of funding on a very basic level more than it is right now?
I mean, I think for Ripple, people, the average purchase is about £2,000, and people are saving £800-900 this year off their bill because prices are so high. It kind of protects you from escalating prices. But we've deliberately set the minimum level at £25. So we're not making any money at that point. The savings on somebody's bill is going to be really tiny. But it is about, going back to that kind of gateway thing. It's like just by showing people that it is accessible for them, they can do it, and then they can kind of build on it in future, buy another bit of a wind farm, buy a bit of a later solar park, and just be able to build it up over time, because it is an issue that sometimes the upfront cost can be relatively high. But obviously when prices are really, really high, that's when you see the shortest paybacks, which is exactly what all of our members are seeing at the moment.
We're moving towards, obviously, more and more percentage of the UK energy consumption to be provided by renewable energy. I kind of wonder, and this is maybe controversial, whether there needs to be a bit more of a shove for us to reach the 2030 targets, whether there needs to be perhaps a bit more of a price differential between, renewable energy and, other types of non-renewable energy, where you go, actually, there's such an incentive to pay for one versus the other. Do you think there could be a bit of a market redistribution help in hand?
There's definitely going to be market redistribution. Like if all new oil boilers being banned from 26, who's going to want to buy a house that's got an oil boiler, right? So by default, you're looking at maybe a devaluation on your home. So therefore, we're looking at actually going forwards. Let's talk about what actually is adding value to a home. And Rightmove, literally this last month, have come back and said that you can add a huge amount, about 15%, in terms of if you've done work to your home. And that's a big incentive, right? And also on new build homes, we've developed technology using the Kraken that actually we can put enough tech onto a brand new home that actually you, the consumer, have an energy efficient home that's worth more, but we're not going to charge you a bill for 5 years. And we're pushing that and trying to get to 10 years. So you can buy a better home, that is more valuable, but actually you can live in it, comfortably, but not have a electricity bill to pay at the end of the month.
The poor souls that are stuck in high-rise flats, what's the scenario for them? Does this apply to them?
So high-rise flats is probably the biggest nut we've got to go and crack, right? They're really difficult. You've got different tenures, you've got leaseholders, you've got all different things as been playing out with all the work we've been having to do as an industry in construction from the cladding issues. So unpicking this is difficult, but we have got great technologies out there. Not one thing is going to save this. So we now have a strong link and partnership with Kenza ground source heat pumps, for example. And working with them, we know that we can use ground source pumps, be it ground source, air source, whatever we need to do to bring this together to help facilitate those homes. But then you can look at things like blinds, really simple technologies as well to help those individuals. But flats is the biggest. I throw that out. If anybody's got technology out there they think they can help us crack the flat scenario, come our way.
That's good. I've got a few questions from the audience, and weirdly they're kind of all directed towards you, John. So if you've got any question for the women on the panel, which would be nice, that would be great. But I'm just going to go ahead and ask you, John, if that's all right, because there's some of them that I find quite amusingly phrased. John, space solar, says one of our audience members, looks great for the future. But wouldn't it be quicker, easier, and cheaper for us to just cover the Sahara Desert in solar panels?
Great question. So if you look at all the forecasts for transition to renewables, 100%, your costs aren't going to go down. They're going to go up. Why is that? Well, when the sun doesn't shine, you need to build overcapacity to charge the non-existent batteries. And then you need a transmission line to go from the Sahara Desert to wherever it is. And believe it or not, if you look at your energy bill today, I look at mine, I pay $220 a megawatt hour in a mature market. The power plants that we have in Michigan, one nuclear power plant, several coal-fired power plants, they've been complete and operating for 60 years. So they've been paid for. We're just operating off of the fuel costs. Of that 220, $30 is generation. The rest is transmission and distribution. All the forecasts looking forward through this transition, all of the costs are distribution charges. So yes, you could do that, but you're going to drive your energy costs up. And driving energy costs up is the opposite of what you want. If you look at historical energy use, we're 2022, we're about 14% of global GDP was energy. At high growth rates of the economy, we're down at like 3 to 4 to 5 to 6%. The energy costs are doing this, and partially it's because of the challenges around renewables. You've got to have backup generation. That backup generation, whether it's coal-fired, natural gas-fired, those systems are only operating half the time. So their amortization costs have to be doubled to pay for their operation and the capital costs. So yes, you could do that. You're going to pay more, and your energy costs are going to continue to rise. If you look at what Germany did, their energy costs are so high now that their industry is struggling to operate. And they've already had, for decades, the highest energy costs in Europe. And they're leaving or shutting down because they can't afford the energy they have. So what percentage of your life should be energy costs? Mm-hmm. Well, that is a great question. It should be low so you can spend your money on something else. And that's what, when I say universal prosperity, that's what we're talking about. It's the standard of living that you can afford to do everything you want and not be shackled with high energy costs. So if you want to make those choices, you can, but there are cheaper solutions. Certainly the nuclear, we know how to do it, we can't. There's no fighting the government on that one. But some of these other technologies, you can do the end run around the existing regulations. There's no regulations in space. It's the Wild West. You can build it, and nobody's going to tell you no. The only thing we have to deal with is spectrum allocation and working with the telecom that's already up there. So those are ways to avoid the rising energy costs that the renewable transition implies. And there also are huge challenges around finding the critical minerals you need to do all of those things. They just don't exist. You would need to have, I think, 6,000 new mines to support this transition and building lots of new transmission. So yes, we could do it using conventional technology, but we're all going to pay for it. And that's really, what do you choose to do? And this is the answer for all of you guys. What's the best path forward, right? Do what we know how to do, or do something that we haven't done yet, but also know how to do.
Mm-hmm. There's another question here which sounds either like a brilliant business idea or something off The Simpsons. So it says, is there secondary benefit of solar panels in space creating shade to reduce global warming? Just a big enough panel? An umbrella?
Yeah, you could. Again, so these satellites are a long ways up. We say that our apogee is 35,000 kilometers. That is 1,000th of a degree width for a 5-kilometer array. So if you can see that, and again, the satellite orbits we put are above and below the orbit ecliptic. So the line of sight from the sun to the Earth, these satellites are above and below it. So you're not going to shade it. But if you want to put shades in space, I would worry about the fact that we are long overdue for an ice age. Just thinking out loud here. So if you put that up there, it's hard to get rid of it, I guess would be the big challenge. So let's wait off on trying to make the Earth colder in case something like that comes along.
Mm-hmm. Very
Okay,
good. Thank
sorry.
you,
If it was your idea, I apologize, but it's a bad one. Okay.
All right, we've got a question for Emma, which is, are you getting resistance from developers to buy into low-carbon houses?
So you can't just ban developers as one single entity, right?
But if you could.
If you could. The big developers are harder to crack than the smaller ones. On the whole, the smaller ones are having to stand out. They're building maybe up to 50 homes. You know, they're fighting the PLCs with these huge pipelines, massive supply chain benefits.
Yeah.
So they have to differentiate, right? And so for the discerning customer, yeah, sure, you know, they can pay for these smaller ones. The biggest struggle I have comes down to cookers. And you wouldn't think that was a thing, but when you talk to some of the PLCs, they say, all our customers love their gas hob and their gas cooker. So why would we electrify? And then when you actually unpick it, and bear in mind I've been in the development industry myself, the real issue is they have all their standard house types. They're all organised around gas supplies. They got their planning permission, they've got their building regs, and actually they just want to crack on because they've spent 7, 8 years, whatever length of time in planning, right? So I think the consumer is changing, and we've basically got to show and lead the way with those that want to engage with us. There is a different path, and actually, guess what? The consumer can live with an electric oven.
Shocking, but true. Yeah. This is a really excellent question, which I think perhaps Sarah, you could answer this, but what are your thoughts about the lack of bids for offshore wind? As I think I might have mentioned this before, or maybe to myself, or at some point, there was a government offer to tender, no one really took it up.
Yeah,
It sounds like the capital is there, but perhaps maybe people don't want to do it in the UK.
Well, I mean, I think just a bit of background. So the government auctions off contracts to build offshore wind farms, onshore wind farms, and solar. And the price, the maximum bid price, has been coming down from, you know, before there was an auction, it was like £155. The last auction came down to 40 something, and then they announced what the maximum bid was for offshore wind, and it was lower. And the industry, I think collectively, just said that's way too low. So, you know, it's not saying that there's gigawatts of wind, offshore wind, waiting, desperately wanting one of those contracts. But if somebody offers you a contract that you're going to lose money on, you're not going to bid for that contract because you're going to lose out. So nobody bid. And it shouldn't have come to the point where the auction happened, because everyone was saying the price is too low, we can't build at that price. But I think, you know, exactly why the government didn't heed those warnings and adjust the price, I don't know. So now we're looking at what would be the next price in the next set of auctions. But it's not, you know, it's not a failure of the offshore wind industry. No. It just means that the price is higher than the crazy low price that the government set. So, you know, there's been a lot of inflation, obviously, throughout the whole supply chain. So yeah, it wasn't unexpected when they set the maximum bid price. It wasn't unexpected that it wasn't going to lead to any capacity. But, you know, as a result, we've now got kind of a year's gap in the rollout of offshore wind, exactly when we need to be really, really ramping up deployment in the UK. So it's not good, but it's not unexpected, I think.
Obviously, there's a chance that this might repeat itself. How damaging is it for our objectives, for our 2030 targets, that we're missing this? I mean, how big of a gap could this gap become?
I mean, I would hope that the government would look at the outcome of this auction and adjust next year's auction price. I mean, if it doesn't, then that would be, you know, a very bad signal to be sending to the industry.
I've got a question about standing order charges. So what are the thoughts of the panel, perhaps this is one for you, Emma, on having to pay for bailed out energy suppliers? There's talking about reform. What would the panel like to see?
It's a difficult one.
It is.
And it depends where the politics lie as well.
Yours or?
Well, generally where we're going as a country
as
well, because we can't be in a system where electricity companies are failing consistently. And at the end of the day, the consumer should be our main focus for everything that we do. And that's the whole sole purpose of us coming to work at Octopus, is providing excellent, outstanding customer service. So, you know, it depends who you're talking to and what position you're coming from. But for me personally, I think we have to do what's best by the customer. Full stop.
Okay. Another question for you, Emma, which is about regulation. The question is, how does regulation ensure that the price differentials are between green and wasteful behaviour and not just between groups consuming in traditional ways? Again, it kind of harks back to what we were saying about the incentives that could be provided. How can you make sure, I mean, is this something that a single provider could do as a starting point, or is it something that has to be agreed collectively as an industry?
So
would you cut your prices so dramatically to make it incredibly appealing for people to have renewable energy?
So we have a problem with our grid.
Go on.
And that's the fundamental problem. I mean, God, if you can get this side of the substations, joy, oh joy, you know, it really opens everything up. Mm-hmm. And because of the grid issues that we've got, it means that, you know, we're constrained. So one of the best things that we're rolling out and rolling out with some of the with UK Power Networks is actually using, when the green electrons are being made, actually using those electrons. So not only have we got flex tariffs for night, day, other sort of things, but actually when there's oversupply, we can actually go use that as well. Mm-hmm. So it's probably not the answer to your question, but I genuinely think, I guess what I'm saying is there's plenty of scope for innovation, and we should be out there and we should be testing it.
Right. Final question for the entire panel, because we have to wrap it up. I want to talk about the 2030 objective really quickly. Could you tell me whether you think we're going to make it in the UK? And if we do, what would be the thing that makes the difference?
2030 or 2050?
2030. Let's go for the 2030 one, because it's closer. That's the only reason.
For me, it's planning restrictions.
Yeah.
Dead simple, really easy. We've got to get more onshore wind. We've got to get more solar. Controversially, maybe actually even putting quite large-scale solar on some of our grade 1 farmland. Yeah. Having spent 5 years working in agri-tech and stuff, we are degrading our productive food land terribly. So actually, we need to start thinking more laterally about how we should be planning this country and enabling more things to come forward in order that we can help everyone.
Brilliant. Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, given the auction, you know, having a stable mechanism that developers can rely on to be able to bring projects forward under, otherwise, you know, particularly for 2030, 2050 it's a bit of a different issue, but 2030, that's a big one. And yeah, unlocking onshore wind in England. There are so many projects that could come forward and they could easily come forward by 2030. It's crazy. Obviously, they need more grid as well, which is another thing. So really boring market and planning and grids. And I'm sick to death of talking about it, but that is the reality.
Thank you, Sarah. And John, space?
I can't get you there by 2030. I'm sorry.
That's
I can get you there 2035 maybe, but 2030, I can't get you to anything by then. But certainly, you have to start leaning that direction, right? You have to start making the choices that get you where you want to go. And some of these new technologies, they are hardware. They take a little while. But yeah, the 2050, totally reasonable. 2040 is totally reasonable. 2030, I need a little help. I don't think I have, even a time machine would help me at that point. So I'll do what I can.
That's brilliant. Okay, thank you three so much for joining me. Thank you very much to our panel.